Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. I don't know what it was about that day. Maybe it was the weight of my failures, or maybe it was just the hollow feeling that had been growing inside me for months. But there I was, wandering down that narrow, forgotten street. My fingers brushed against the worn spines of old books in dusty window displays, my mind desperately searching for something, anything, to spark that inspiration I hadn't felt in so long. It was an antique shop, tucked away between two towering buildings, the kind of place you'd walk past without a second thought. But for some reason, my feet carried me inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It wasn't just colder, but thick, like something had settled here, lingering in the shadows. The shelves were packed with relics from another time, faded records, tarnished jewelry, and books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Everything was covered in dust, forgotten by the world. I remember the old shopkeeper, sitting behind the counter, barely moving. His eyes were sunken, his hands trembling slightly around a cup of tea, as if the weight of the years had drained the life from him. When he looked up at me, it wasn't a welcoming look. There was something resigned in his eyes, as if he had seen too much. Or maybe he had been waiting for someone like me. I didn't think much of it. I was just looking for something, anything, to reignite my spark. As a musician, I was used to searching for that one thing that would push me out of the endless rut I'd been stuck in. But nothing I touched felt right. Nothing sparked the fire, not until I saw it. At the back of the store, half hidden beneath a pile of old vinyl records, I found it. A sheet of music. At first, it just looked like any other scrap of paper, worn with age, its edges curling up. But the moment I picked it up, something inside me stirred. It was like it had been waiting for me. The ink was old but clear, the notes precise, and the melody, it felt familiar, almost haunting. The song whispered to me in a language I couldn't understand, but it felt like it was meant for me. I ran my fingers over the paper, a chill running down my spine. There was something about the way the notes were arranged, the rhythm of it. It didn't seem right, it felt ancient, otherworldly. I couldn't put it down. I don't know why, but I had to know more. The song seemed to hum with a life of its own, like it was calling me, pulling me toward it. I could almost hear it playing in my head as I stared at the paper. It was too perfect, too strange. I wasn't just looking at music, I was looking at something dangerous. I glanced up at the shopkeeper. His eyes narrowed as he watched me holding the music. It was then I noticed how pale his face was, how the veins under his skin seemed to pulse with a life that wasn't quite natural. He looked at me with that empty, haunted gaze and said, "That's an old one. You sure you want that?" His voice was low, gravelly, like something was trapped in his throat. I don't know why, but a sense of dread settled over me. It was like I had just crossed a line I shouldn't have crossed. He didn't say another word, just stared at me with those sunken eyes, like he knew something I didn't. Something I was about to learn the hard way. But it didn't matter. I was desperate. I was ready to take any chance, any spark of inspiration, no matter how strange. I nodded and paid for the sheet music without question. As I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was pulling at me, at my very soul. The bell above the door rang softly as I stepped out, but the sound seemed wrong. like it was echoing in a space it wasn't meant to fill. I felt lighter, like I had just made a decision I couldn't undo. But with every step I took away from that shop, the weight of it grew heavier, pressing against me. The sheet music beneath my arm began to feel like a burden. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like I was carrying something much older than I was, something far darker than I could comprehend. I didn't know it then, but the song was already inside me. It was already changing things. The first note would be my undoing. I didn't know the shopkeeper's warning wasn't just words. I didn't know that the song wasn't meant to inspire, it was meant to consume. And once I played it, there was no going back. I wish I could tell you that this all started with a feeling, a hunch, or even a warning. But I didn't know then what I was getting myself into. I was just a man looking for a spark. Something to get me out of the rut I'd been trapped in for too long. My name is Jake Carter, and I was a struggling musician, lost in a world of faded dreams and unfinished melodies. One day, I found myself wandering through an old, forgotten part of town. The kind of place where time seemed to stop, where the streets were narrow and the buildings were barely hanging on. And there it was, a tiny antique shop tucked away between two crumbling facades. I hadn't planned to go in, but something about it drew me in. It felt right. So I pushed open the door. The shop was dimly lit, the air thick with dust and age. Every inch of the place was covered in old relics, faded books, tarnished trinkets, and objects that looked like they'd been forgotten by the world. But as soon as I stepped inside, it felt as though the very air had shifted. Something strange lingered in the atmosphere, heavy and suffocating. The shopkeeper, an old man with sunken eyes and a trembling hand, sat behind the counter. He barely looked up as I entered, but when his eyes met mine, there was something about them that unsettled me. It wasn't just that they were hollow. There was a kind of knowing in them. A recognition, though I couldn't place it. I wandered deeper into the shop, my gaze skimming over the cluttered shelves, hoping to find something that might spark a new tune, a fresh idea, but nothing. The shop felt oppressive, like the past was closing in on me. Then I saw it. Beneath a pile of forgotten records, I caught a glimpse of something white. At first, I thought it was just a stray piece of paper, but as I pulled it out, I realized it was something far more unusual, a sheet of music. It was ancient-looking, the paper yellowed with age, curling at the edges. But the music itself, God, there was something about it. The notes were perfectly formed, like they were written for someone, like they were waiting for me. As I held it in my hands, a strange pull tugged at my chest. I didn't know why, but I knew I had to play it. I had to hear it. The song spoke to me, though I couldn't explain how or why. It called me, whispered to me in a language that felt both alien and familiar, like it had been inside me all along. The shopkeeper noticed me then. His eyes locked onto the sheet music, narrowing just slightly. He didn't speak, but there was something in his expression, something that made my skin crawl. "That's an old one," he said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "You sure you want that?" I didn't respond. What could I say? I wasn't sure why, but I needed it. I paid for it without a second thought and left the shop, the bell above the door chiming softly behind me. The moment I stepped outside, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The air felt heavier, as if something had shifted in the world around me. The song was in my hands, and I was already too deep to turn back. I don't know how I made it home. The streets seemed longer than usual, the shadows on the sidewalk stretching unnaturally. The apartment, when I finally arrived, was darker than I remembered. I didn't think about it. I placed the sheet music on my piano and sat down, eager to play, to feel that spark again. I don't know why I thought I could just play it, that I could just hear the song and be done. The moment my fingers brushed the keys, I felt it. The air grew colder. The shadows in the room stretched, flickering like they were alive. I thought it was just my imagination, the unease creeping up on me, but then I heard it. The first note. It was soft, almost like a whisper. It hung in the air for just a moment before fading into the silence. But as soon as I played it, something shifted. The temperature dropped, and my breath came out in visible clouds, the chill settling deep in my bones. I thought about stopping, but I couldn't. The music, it felt like it was pulling me in. My fingers moved on their own, pressing down on the keys, each note more insistent than the last. And that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. Shadows on the wall that didn't seem quite right, shifting in ways that didn't make sense. But then they started moving. Slowly at first, like they were creeping, stretching toward me. I should have stopped playing then. I should have run. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop. The shadows grew darker, more solid, like they were becoming something else. Something alive. Faces began to form. Hollow eyes, twisted mouths, their expressions contorted with hunger. I froze, my hands trembling over the piano keys, but still, I couldn't stop. The song was inside me now, controlling me, guiding me. The room felt wrong. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching, creeping closer, like the very air was being consumed by them. I tried to pull away, to break free, but I was trapped. The shadows were everywhere, their forms now clearly defined, their eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. They reached toward me, their hands, no, their limbs, outstretched, and I could feel them, cold and clammy, brushing against my skin. The music, the melody, it kept playing. Even as my hands faltered, even as I tried to pull away. But I couldn't stop playing. The song had control now. Then, the final note came. The one I'd been building to, the one that was supposed to bring it all together. But when I struck it, there was no sense of completion. There was no release. Instead, the shadows surged forward, their cold hands grasping at me, pulling me into the darkness. The room spun, the shadows swallowing the light, the music still ringing in my ears. I screamed, but it was as though my voice was lost in the void. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then, in that suffocating darkness, everything went silent. The song had ended. But so had I. I don't know what I expected to happen when I played the song. Maybe I thought it would just be a strange piece of music, an eerie melody that would fade as soon as I stopped playing. But it wasn't. It wasn't just a song, it was alive. And now, it had me. The moment my fingers pressed down on those first notes, something shifted in the room. At first, I thought it was just the chill of the night creeping in through the windows, but it wasn't. It was colder than that. The temperature dropped so fast that I could see my breath in the air, and the shadows, they started moving. At first, it was subtle. A flicker in the corner of my eye, a strange shift in the dark spaces around the room. But then, they grew bolder, and that's when I realized something was terribly wrong. The walls seemed to stretch and breathe, like the very room itself had taken on a life of its own. The shadows on the walls, which had once been just static forms, were now twisting, bending unnaturally. I watched in disbelief as they crept toward me, pulling the darkness around them like a cloak. They were alive, aware, and they were moving closer with every note I played. I tried to stop, I really did. My fingers ached, and my chest tightened with fear, but the song, it wouldn't let me. It had its grip on me, pulling me deeper into its world. The shadows were thick now, like tar, their forms stretching and elongating. They began to take shape. Twisted, deformed figures with hollow eyes that locked onto me with a hunger I could feel deep in my gut. I could see their mouths now, wide and gaping, like dark voids waiting to swallow everything in sight. My heart raced. My palms were slick with sweat, but I couldn't move. I couldn't stop playing. The song was in my head now, not just in my fingers but in my mind. It was pulling me in. I could feel its rhythm, its beat, wrapping itself around my thoughts until everything else, the room, the shadows, even my fear, faded away. There was only the song, and it was in control. And that's when I heard it. A whisper. A low, guttural sound, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. It filled my ears, making my head ache, drowning out everything else. "You shouldn't have played," the voice said. It wasn't the voice of a man. It wasn't even human. It was something else. Something ancient. Something wrong. The shadows around me shifted again, and this time they weren't just flickering, they were moving, crawling along the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Their forms were distorting, elongating into grotesque, unnatural shapes. I could see their eyes now, so many eyes, all glowing with an otherworldly light. They stared at me. They knew me. I tried to scream. I tried to break free, but no sound came out. The music kept playing, the notes echoing in my skull, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't control it. My fingers were moving on their own now, the keys pressing down like a mechanical force that had taken over. The shadows were everywhere now, swirling, suffocating the room. The walls seemed to close in around me. The darkness was alive, and it was consuming everything. I watched in horror as the shadows began to take form, shifting into something more solid, something more real. The dark shapes crawled closer to me, their limbs stretching, reaching, like they were trying to drag me into the black void that surrounded us. They whispered in my ear, their voices a chorus of something dark, primal. "We warned you. Now you're ours." My pulse thundered in my ears. Panic seized my chest, but I couldn't move. The shadows were too close, their long fingers stretching toward me, brushing against my skin with a coldness that made my blood freeze. I could feel them, inside me. The air was thick, suffocating, and the room felt like it was being swallowed whole. The final note was building now, rising in the air like a crescendo that would either release me or destroy me. I struck it, my hands trembling, and as the note rang out, the shadows surged forward, coiling around me like a vice. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could feel was their cold touch, pulling me, dragging me into the blackness. And just like that, the music stopped. But the shadows didn't. They continued to close in, and with one final, suffocating pull, they consumed me. There was no light, no sound, just the crushing, endless blackness and the whisper of those hollow voices now inside me. "You are ours now." And just like that, I was gone. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. All I knew was that I was desperate. Desperate for something to break me free from the endless rut my life had become. Music was all I had left. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. One night, I found myself in a tiny, run-down antique shop tucked between buildings that seemed older than time itself. The bell above the door rang with a creak as I entered, and the smell hit me. Dust, aged wood, something musty that seemed to seep into every corner of the room. There was a strange stillness in the air, like the store itself had been forgotten by the world. I didn't question why I'd walked in. I had no idea. It was just the kind of place that felt right. The shopkeeper barely looked up from behind the counter, his frail hands wrapped around a cup of tea. But when he did glance at me, I swear there was something in his eyes. Something hollow, like he knew something I didn't. Something I wasn't meant to know. I walked past shelves of forgotten things, each one telling its own silent story. Books that had yellowed with age, tarnished antiques, records that were scratched beyond repair. But then there it was, hidden beneath a stack of vinyl records. A single tattered piece of sheet music. The paper was old, yellowed, its edges curling as if it had been waiting for me, though I didn't know why I felt that way. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I brushed away the dust. The notes were faint but still legible, written in a delicate, almost unnatural hand. Something about it seemed off, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what it was. I had to play it. The music called to me in a way I can't explain, like it had been written just for me, like it had been waiting for me to find it. The shopkeeper didn't stop me. He just watched as I paid for it, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "That's an old one," he said, his voice gravelly. "You sure you want that?" I nodded, and without a second thought I left. When I got home, I didn't hesitate. I laid the sheet music on my piano, staring at it for a long moment, as if it were some kind of cursed relic. But I didn't care. I had to play it. I had to know. My fingers touched the keys. The first note came out soft, barely audible, but it was enough to make the air feel strange, cold. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my nerves. But then it happened again. The shadows in the room started to flicker. They moved, unnaturally. I froze, but my fingers wouldn't stop. The next note sounded, and I could feel something shift in the room. A presence, like the very walls were closing in on me. The air grew colder still, and that's when I heard it. The low hum of something that wasn't right. The shadows began to stretch, twisting like liquid, crawling across the walls and floor, moving toward me, closer, closer. I tried to stop. I tried to pull my hands away from the keys, but it was as if the song had taken control of my body. The notes kept flowing, drawing me deeper into the music. The shadows weren't just creeping anymore. They were alive, shifting, forming, becoming something more real. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to stand up, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was frozen. The room was no longer my apartment. It had turned into something else, something darker, something alive. The walls were breathing, expanding and contracting like the chest of some great, unseen beast. And then, I saw them. I don't know how to explain it. The shapes in the shadows. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were figures, faces. I could see their hollow eyes staring at me, their twisted mouths stretching into grotesque, impossibly wide grins. Their hands, long, skeletal limbs, reached toward me, and I could feel the cold air they left behind as they moved. "You shouldn't have played," one of them whispered. I couldn't scream. My throat was tight, my breath shallow. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was surrounded, trapped. The music, the song, it was pulling me in, deeper and deeper, until the shadows were pressing against me, consuming the room, filling it with their chilling presence. The final note came. I didn't play it. My hands weren't mine anymore. They moved on their own as if they were controlled by something far more powerful than me. When the last note struck, the shadows surged forward, their hands stretching out to take me. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. The darkness was everywhere, swirling, drowning me. And then, everything stopped. Silence. I don't know how long I was suspended in that moment, trapped between the space of the living and the dead, but the room had changed. It wasn't the same place anymore. The walls were cracked, the air heavy, like I was breathing underwater. And in the center of the room hovering just above the piano, was the sheet music. But it wasn't the same sheet music. It was alive. The notes, those once simple lines on the page, now moved. They twisted and turned, curling in ways they never should have. The ink itself seemed to writhe, like it was trying to escape, as if the sheet music were trying to break free from the page. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. The shadows were all around me again, their forms even more solid now, their presence more real. And then I heard it. The whispers. The song. It wasn't just music. It was a ritual, a summoning. I had opened the door. I had called them. The shadows weren't just figments of my imagination. They were creatures. They existed within the melody itself, bound to it for eternity, waiting for someone like me to play. The shopkeeper had warned me. He knew. He had seen it happen before. And now it was happening to me. I had become part of the song, part of the darkness. There was no escaping it now. The shadows had claimed me. And with that, I realized the truth too late. The song had never been meant for me to play. It was a trap. A way for them to find me, to feed off me, to claim me. The music played on, its melody now echoing in my head, and as the shadows closed in, I understood. I was never meant to escape. The song. It would never let me go. I didn't know how I ended up in that shop. Or maybe I did, deep down. Maybe I had been searching for something, though I wasn't sure what. Maybe I was just drawn to it. The old, cluttered store on the forgotten street corner seemed to hum with a kind of ancient pull, like it was calling me from the moment I laid eyes on it. The dusty bell above the door jangled softly as I stepped inside, the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories filling the air. The shop was a maze of relics from another time. Books piled high, tarnished antiques that looked like they hadn't seen daylight in decades, and records that had lived countless lives, scratched, faded, and worn by time. The air was thick with dust and the weight of forgotten history. But then I saw it. A sheet of music buried beneath a stack of vinyl, the paper curling at the edges, its notes barely visible through the grime. I don't know why I picked it up. I don't know what I thought it was, or why it felt so familiar, like a ghost I had known my whole life. The notes on the page were old, handwritten in a delicate script that felt like it belonged to another era. But there was something about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, that made me need to play it. The shopkeeper watched me, his gaze hollow, too knowing for an ordinary man. He didn't stop me as I paid for it, though he did mutter something under his breath, almost like a warning. "Be careful with that one," he rasped. "You don't know what you're touching." I shrugged it off, the weight of the paper in my hand already filling me with a strange sense of anticipation. I didn't know then what he meant, what he saw in me, or what would happen next. I didn't know that by taking that sheet of music, I was inviting something into my life, something far older, far darker than I could ever imagine. At home, I sat at my piano, the dim light of my apartment flickering in the corners of the room. I placed the sheet music before me and rested my fingers on the keys, the chill of the air creeping up my spine. I felt it then, this tug, like the song was pulling at me, urging me to play. I pressed the first note. It was barely a sound, a whisper, a breath on the wind, but it shivered through the air. The room seemed to darken around me, the shadows stretching, flickering at the edges of my vision. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then the second note came, and the room grew colder. Much colder. My breath began to fog in front of me, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't pull away. The music wasn't mine anymore. It was controlling me. My fingers moved of their own accord, playing the notes faster, more urgently, as though something was pushing me from within, forcing me to continue. And as I played, the shadows grew stronger. They stretched across the walls, across the floor, twisting and writhing like living things, as if they were being called forth by the very music I was creating. The room felt alive. Alive in a way that was wrong. The air was thick, suffocating. My heart raced, but my hands didn't stop. The shadows were moving now, their forms becoming more solid, more real. I could see them, feel them, shifting, pressing against the walls, inching closer. Faces began to appear in the darkness. Twisted, hollow eyes staring at me, mouths twisted into grotesque, silent grins. And then the whispers started. Low, guttural voices. It was like 1,000 voices all murmuring at once, but the sound didn't come from anywhere. It was inside me, inside my head. "You shouldn't have played," one of them hissed. I froze. The music faltered under my trembling fingers, but I couldn't stop. The shadows surged forward, moving toward me, growing thicker, darker, and their faces, those horrible faces, became clearer, more distinct. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The room was suffocating, closing in on me, the shadows pressing down on every side. I tried to pull my hands away, but the song had its grip on me. The notes kept coming, flowing through me, as if the very song was alive and determined to finish itself. The shadows reached for me, their limbs long and twisted, stretching toward me, their fingers icy cold. I could feel them now, inside me. Their coldness pressed against my skin, seeped into my bones, and I felt my mind begin to unravel, my thoughts growing chaotic. The song, it was a door. It wasn't just music, it was a ritual, a summoning. And I had opened the gate. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. The presence of something more powerful, something darker than anything I had ever known. The shadows were just the beginning. The song was their conduit. It was what had called them. And then I understood. The truth hit me with a force so sharp it left me breathless. I had been chosen, not by fate, not by chance. The song had chosen me. I had summoned them, opened the doorway with my own hands. And now I was theirs. The shadows surged forward. They swallowed the light. The room was completely dark now, consumed by their hunger. And I was no longer part of the world I knew. I was part of the song, part of the darkness, forever. And as the shadows wrapped themselves around me, pulling me deeper into their fold, I understood with horrifying clarity. There was no escape. The song had taken me. The shadows had taken me. And the door was closed. Forever. I was their prisoner now. I didn't want to call Dr. Benson. I didn't want to drag him into whatever nightmare I had gotten myself into, but I didn't have a choice. The shadows were growing stronger, their presence more real every day, and I was slipping, losing myself to the darkness that had been creeping into my life ever since that damn song had first called to me. It wasn't just the music anymore, it was them, the creatures, the shadows. I could feel them, see them, in every corner of my world. They were suffocating me, but I couldn't fight them alone. I needed someone. I needed Dr. Benson. Dr. Marcus Benson was a brilliant mind, a neuroscientist, a psychologist, a man who built his career on logic, on facts, on the tangible. He didn't believe in things like ghosts, spirits, or the supernatural. He believed in what could be measured, in what could be explained. But I didn't know who else to turn to. I couldn't explain what was happening to me. I didn't understand it myself, but I knew one thing. It was real, and I was losing control. I dialed his number, my hands trembling. The phone rang once, twice, and then he picked up. Dr. Benson. His voice was steady, professional. "How can I help you?" I didn't know where to begin. What could I say? How could I tell him that the song I had played was not just a melody, but a portal? That the shadows, the beings, weren't just figments of my imagination? That I was being haunted by something far older than I was, something that wanted to pull me into its darkness? I need your help, I finally managed to say. Something is happening to me. I don't know what it is, but I can't fight it alone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, the slight rustle of papers, and then his voice, calm and measured as always, spoke again. Come to my office, let's see what we can make of this. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe it was because I needed to believe that someone could make sense of it, that someone could explain what had been happening to me. Or maybe it was because I was desperate, and he was the only person I thought could help. The next day, I found myself standing outside his office, staring at the tall building in front of me. It was everything my apartment was not. Clean, orderly, polished. There was no sign of the creeping madness that had been overtaking my life. As I walked through the glass doors, the sterile atmosphere of the lobby hit me like a cold slap. The air smelled of disinfectant, and everything felt too perfect, like a place where nothing could go wrong, where nothing unexplainable could ever occur. I stepped into his office and took a seat across from him. Dr. Benson's office was neat, organized, the opposite of everything I had been feeling. His desk was stacked with books and research papers, the faint hum of a computer in the background. He was seated behind his desk, pen in hand, staring at me with an expression that seemed to blend curiosity with skepticism. His eyes were sharp, always analyzing, but today there was something else behind them, something like concern. Now, Jake, he began, his voice steady, but with a tinge of something I couldn't quite place. What's going on? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly explain the unexplainable? How could I tell him that the shadows were real, that they were moving in the corners of my apartment, that they were following me, whispering to me? How could I explain that the song I had played, wasn't just music, but a ritual, a doorway, a trap? So I started with the basics. I told him about the shop, the antique store, the strange sheet music I had found. I explained the way it had called to me, how it had felt as though the music was alive, pulling me in. I told him about the first time I played it, how the air had turned cold, how the shadows had moved toward me, how it felt as though something was inside the music, something ancient and powerful, something I could not control. I watched Dr. Benson as I spoke. He didn't interrupt, didn't laugh or dismiss me, but his face, it was unreadable. He made notes in his journal, the scratching sound of the pen filling the room, and I felt a sickening mix of hope and dread. Was he going to believe me? Would he understand? Or would he just think I was losing my mind? When I finished, there was a long silence. Dr. Benson leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together in front of him. His expression remained neutral, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was processing it, analyzing it. "Jake," he finally said, his voice calm, though there was an edge to it now. "What you're describing is outside the realm of what I can explain. I don't believe in the supernatural, as you know, but what you're describing is real. It's affecting you, and that's something I can't ignore." His words hit me like a slap. He didn't believe in the supernatural, but he acknowledged that something was wrong with me. Something that couldn't be easily explained. I could feel the weight of his words settling on my chest, heavy with the implication that he had no answers, only questions. "Are you saying I'm hallucinating?" I asked, my voice shaky. I hated the way it sounded, desperate, unsure. "No," Dr. Benson said, his voice firm now. "What I'm saying is that your mind is being influenced. It's reacting to something. Something deep. The human mind doesn't just conjure this sort of thing out of nowhere. Whatever is happening to you, it's rooted in something. It could be psychological. It could be something deeper. But we'll find out what's at the core of it. I nodded, though my chest tightened. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear that this could all be in my head, that I could be imagining the shadows, the whispers, the feeling of being followed, of being watched. "I'll help you, Jake," he continued, "but you have to trust me. We need to figure out what triggered this, and why it's consuming you." I wanted to believe him. I did. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Benson was hiding something. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, a tiny moment of hesitation that made my blood run cold. Dr. Benson didn't believe in the supernatural, but something in his expression told me that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to question that. And as I left his office that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one afraid anymore. I had never wanted to involve Ella in any of this. She was my rock, my best friend, the one person who kept me grounded, who kept me sane. We'd been through everything together, the highs, the lows, the messes I'd gotten myself into. She had always been the voice of reason, the one who dismissed anything strange as coincidence or stress. I had always admired her for that. Her ability to look at the world with clear, logical eyes, unaffected by the chaos swirling around me. But now, she was starting to see it. She was starting to feel it too. It started subtly, just like it had with me. At first, she came to my apartment for dinner, smiling and laughing, as if everything was normal. But I could see it in her eyes. She was nervous. Not the kind of nervous that comes from a bad day, but the kind that gnaws at you, deep in your gut. The kind that says something is wrong, even if you can't quite place it. I didn't want to ask her about it. I didn't want to admit that I had already seen the signs, but she couldn't hide it forever. It was later that night when she finally broke. She was sitting on the couch, fiddling with a cup of tea in her hands, staring at it like it might suddenly burst into flames. She was quieter than usual, her usual sharp wit muted, as though a part of her was somewhere else, somewhere far away. "Jake," she said, her voice small, almost unsure, I'm seeing things." "I'm seeing." I froze, the blood draining from my face. I knew what she meant. I could feel it too, but I didn't want to believe it. Not for her. Not for the person who had always been the rational one. The one who had never believed in anything unexplainable. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to face her. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated, then slowly set the cup down. Her fingers lingered on the edge of it, like she wasn't sure she should say the words out loud. "Shadows. They're moving, Jake. I keep seeing them out of the corner of my eye, just flickering, like they're following me." The room felt suddenly smaller. The air in my lungs thickened, as if the very space around us was closing in, pressing against me. My mind raced. I wanted to reach out to tell her it was nothing, to tell her it was just stress, just her imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew exactly what she was talking about, and I hated myself for it. I had brought this into her life, and now, the shadows, those creatures, those things were after her too. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ella, listen to me. I didn't want to tell you this, but it's real. The shadows, the song, they're not just in my head, it's not just me. They're real, and they're following you too." She looked at me then, her eyes wide, her face pale as though she had heard something she couldn't comprehend. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "What shadows?" "I thought you said it was all in your head, Jake. That it was just some mental break or stress or—" "No," I cut her off, my own fear creeping into my voice. "It's not like that. The song. It's not just music. It's a door, Ella. It's a ritual, a trap. I found this sheet of music, and when I played it, My words faltered, and I stopped myself. I didn't want to say it out loud to make it real, but she was already here, already in it, whether she believed me or not. I opened something that wasn't meant to be opened. And now it's after us. Her face twisted in confusion, but there was fear there too. I could see it in the way her hands clenched the edge of her chair, the way her breath quickened. I had never seen her this way before, vulnerable, unsure, terrified. "I thought I was just seeing things," she said softly, almost to herself, her voice trembling. "But I've been hearing them too, the whispers that come in the dark when I'm alone." My chest tightened, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her it would be okay, to assure her that we could fix this, that there was a way out. But I knew, deep down, there wasn't. The shadows were here, and once they found you, there was no turning back. "Ella," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You're not imagining it, the shadows. They're real. I've seen them too, and they're not just watching, they're waiting." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant, her eyes flickering to the corners of the room like she was searching for something. Then she spoke, barely audible, her voice trembling with a quiet horror. "They've been watching me, haven't they?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They've been waiting for me to turn around." I nodded, unable to speak, the fear choking me. I had no answers. I couldn't protect her. The shadows had already set their sights on her, and I could see it in the way her eyes darted nervously around the room, the way she couldn't sit still, as if the very air around her was suffocating her. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the air shifted. The room grew colder. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, lengthen, like they were stretching, twisting into something alive. I felt the change, the sudden oppressive weight of something closing in on us. Ella's eyes widened as she looked toward the far corner of the room, her body going rigid. Jake, there." Before she could finish her sentence, the lights flickered, once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. My heart stopped in my chest as I heard it, the whispering, low, guttural, like something scraping across my bones, coming from everywhere, from nowhere. "You're next," the voice hissed, its words slithering into my ears. I reached for Ella, but she pulled away, her face twisted in horror, her body trembling. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on something in the corner of the room, something that wasn't supposed to be there. The shadows. They were moving, crawling. And then I heard her scream. A sound so raw, so filled with terror, that it felt like it was tearing through the very fabric of reality. I spun toward her, but before I could reach her, the darkness seemed to swallow her whole, the shadows coiling around her like a vice. Her scream echoed in the room, but it was fading into nothingness. In the blink of an eye, Ella was gone, vanished. The shadows had taken her. I was left in the dark, alone, with nothing but the whispers. The shadows had come for her, just like they had come for me. I had failed to protect her, and now there was no escape. The shadows would never stop. I don't know how it all spiraled out of control so quickly. It's like one moment, I was a man living a normal life, and in the next, I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. A nightmare that started the moment I found that song. But now, here I am, sitting at the piano, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The cursed sheet music is spread out before me, its notes staring back like a mocking reminder of everything I've lost. The room around me feels smaller, like the walls are closing in, suffocating me, and the air is thick with dread, as though something is waiting. I don't know how much longer I can stand this. The shadows that have been creeping at the edge of my vision for days now are growing bolder, inching closer to me, just outside the faint glow of the lamp. I can feel them pressing in like 1,000 unseen eyes are watching, waiting for the moment when I finally lose control. The whispering voices from the dark are louder now, filling my mind with their promises, their commands. I look at the sheet music again. The final note is there, hanging over me like an inevitable doom, and I know that once I play it, once I finish this damn song, there's no going back. I've known that since the first time I touched the piano, since the first note whispered through the air like a call to something far darker than I could ever imagine. But I can't stop. I can't turn away. Something is forcing me to play. It's not just the shadows. It's the song itself wrapped around my soul, dragging me deeper into the abyss with every passing second. The shadows, they're moving now. I can see them more clearly, their shapes distorting in the dim light. The edges of the room bend, flicker, and twist, warping around the growing darkness. And I can hear them. The whispers are sharper now, like they're speaking directly into my ear. Finish it. You can't escape. I lift my hands to the keys, and my fingers press down without me even thinking. The first note rings out, a soft, trembling sound, but it feels heavy, like the air around me thickens with every breath I take. The shadows stretch, dark tendrils reaching toward me, their shapes becoming clearer, their forms more solid, like they're alive. I can hear them now, feel them. Their eyes are on me, hollow and endless, like black holes in the center of their faces, watching, waiting. They're circling me, closer now, just beyond my peripheral vision, but I don't dare turn away from the piano. I can't. If I stop playing, they'll take me. If I stop playing, I'll never escape. The next note comes, trembling beneath my fingers. It's colder now. The temperature in the room drops sharply, the chill seeping into my skin, into my very bones. I try to pull my hand away from the keys, but I can't. My body moves against my will, and the music plays itself, as if it knows what I need before I even do. The shadows are here now, surrounding me, their whispers turning into low, guttural voices. I can feel them, inside me, crawling through my thoughts, pressing against my mind, suffocating me. My heart is pounding so loudly in my chest that I can barely hear the notes I'm playing anymore. "You shouldn't have played," one of them hisses in my ear. The last note is coming. I can feel it, hovering in the air, waiting for me to press the key. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I want to do it. But I have to. I can feel the pressure mounting, the shadows closing in, their hands reaching for me, their long, skeletal fingers brushing against my skin. They're hungry. I know I have to finish it. The final note. The one that will either set me free or damn me forever. With a shaking hand, I press it. The sound that follows is unlike anything I've ever heard. It's not just a note. It's a scream, an explosion of sound that rips through the room, echoing in my skull, vibrating my very being. It's sharp, deafening, a dissonant chord that feels like it's tearing apart the fabric of the world itself. The shadows convulse, writhing in agony, but they don't stop. They surge forward, drawn to the sound, to the final note, and I can feel them pulling me, dragging me into their cold, suffocating grip. The walls collapse, the floor crumbles beneath me, and the shadows swallow everything, everything. The piano, the room, the very air. I can't breathe. I can't move. The darkness is everywhere, filling my lungs, choking the life from me. And through it all, I hear it. The song, the melody, the final note. The shadows wrap around me, their cold fingers clutching at my throat, their eyes burning into me. I try to scream, but no sound escapes. I try to move, but I'm frozen, trapped in the darkness, trapped in the song. And then, in the silence that follows, I realize something. I've become part of it, part of the song, part of the shadows. There is no escaping, there never was, and as the final echoes of the song fade, I hear them again, the whispers. You are ours now. I'm not Jake Carter anymore. I'm just another note in the song. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.